Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire, or in this case, the Letheri Empire, and we'll see what goes on. We're continuing with All That Lies Unseen, Book 3 of Midnight Tides. Nothing more to say, I suspect, for today. I'm still not, doing much new knitting. I'll probably start something new real soon. Not tomorrow though, because tomorrow I gotta help someone move, and that's always fun to carry around tons of boxes. Right. Anyway, let's start with today's discussion of more stuff from book 3. Here you go. Cheers. Well, so what are we going to talk about today? Um, Well, there's more of the whole. Okay, there's a bunch of things that I want to talk about that I feel are important. I might turn back. I guess I should turn back a bit to the what stuff that I forgot to talk about last time when Bryce Benedict is talking to the guy who now seems to get swords in the grounds near the Azath house. Yes, that one. There's one thing that I felt was really, really important to discuss. I'm not sure if I'll do it justice today because, yeah, I don't know. That's when the dude talks about the fact that um, the Letheri system is built in a way to enforce conformity and yes, to enforce conformity. And that's a very interesting thought right there that you can find. I would not go so far as to say it's a criticism of positivism, but in a way it is, because the problem there is it's not so much conformity but also normality. And the idea of normality being something that is not just the statistical average of something, but also then weighed with a moral judgment that then leads to, yes, all kinds of terrible things that come right after that, right? We're not going to go into the details of that, but I just found it interesting that this bit of thought right there was dropped in there. It's something that you find in a rather often find in the more left-leaning criticism of the Age of the Enlightenment, for example, if you ever feel like reading that kind of stuff, which you should, because it's good theory. At least some of it is. Yes, talking of that guy, there's a new discussion, a new episode with him, and I mean, let's be real here. If we connect all the dots, we know that this person is Silcha's ruin, who was dropped in the Azath garden by Scamandari Bloodeye. He's looking for 2 new swords. He's apparently been wandering around anyway as a ghost, or seems like that. The Betrayer, as some people might call him. And yes, he's talking to Kettle now, and we learn a lot of weird things about Kettle as well. We have another exposition of the another bit of info about the Forkroll Assail, which so far are still like the most mysterious of the founding species, are like those early species. We have seen Kachain Jamal, we have heard about Jaghad, obviously. We've met very few Forkroll Assail. We are probably very happy that we have met very few of them. And it seems that dragons don't like them, that Silcha's Ruin doesn't like them, and that the soul within the child kettle, at least part of the soul within the child kettle, is apparently Forkroll Assail. And now when you turn back and remember, there's that scene in like one of Udina's dreams. I think it's Udina's dreams, where finds that frozen forkroll assail, or what looks very much like a forkroll assail, with a hole in the back of its head where someone has taken something out of the head. Someone who has left footsteps of a child. Now that's, I'm not gonna make that connection here. It just, I'm detecting some synchronicity, is what I'm trying to say here. Anyway, we learn something more about the Forkroll Assail and their enforcing and acting and enforcing of what they perceive as justice and action and balance. And obviously, Ruth and Bud has made a very interesting and very good video on the subject of the Forkroll Assail and their morality. If you want to watch that, it is unfortunately or fortunately, I mean, it can only work because it is full of spoilers for the full series. So I'll link it below. It's good. But something in here that the spirit of Silcha says to Kettle is very interesting. It's like that adjudicating makes the concept of justice obsolete, because once you have achieved these, like the enforcing of balance and the action itself makes the action itself moral in a way, because once you have done these things, then you don't need to question your actions anymore. And that's sort of as a continuation to that thing of enforcing conformity and morality in a normality in a way, goes in the same direction. It's like you decide on what is the goal, and then you achieve that goal by any means necessary in a way. And suddenly that's, I guess, the idea that the problem that you see there is like something that is at first just a realization about a state or a state of nature in a way. It's like you look at something, it's like nature tends towards balance. Nature tends towards balance. So the achieving of balance is a good thing. And suddenly you have attached morality to something that is by definition not a moral, not a subject for moral judgment, right? And that's the same thing as the one that we had before with the conformity or normality. It's like you look at something, the average not sticking out is the not being noticed, not sticking out is the perceived as conformity, obviously, and as normality. You look at statistics that this is normal, and that makes everything else abnormal. And just the way we use the word abnormality already tells you that suddenly that moral judgment has crept in there as well. Just like with the idea of balance being normal, balance being the trend of nature, the norm of nature, and suddenly achieving balance becomes a moral imperative, even though nature, as they say, is blind and doesn't care about morals. It's just like a force of nature in the end. And that, I feel, is an interesting thing to look at, yeah, is an interesting thought to keep in mind. All right, what's the next bit for talking for today? I feel one other thing that we need to look at is becoming your enemy. Now, obviously, we have first, we see the first like beginnings of the war. Everything happens the way, like the Lether Empire or Lether Kingdom proceeds on its usual approach, like preemptive strike, reign of terror, see like shock and awe tactics, if you if you want, and hoping that that works. Now, obviously, that was anticipated by the Tist Edur, who are now starting an all-out war and invasion. They're set on invasion. That's basically, they changed the parameters. They're not fighting a defensive war, they're fighting an offensive war. But that's not the thing I wanted to look at here. The thing I wanted to look at is that small bit about demons. I've spoken about demons before, you remember, in different situations, but mostly in Gardens of the Moon. You have that first like demon that we then meet in the sword later on, that is summoned, that Quickman like throws down, and that is then killed by Anomander Rake. Nash spoke about the concept of demon summoning being something very much akin to slavery, or being the same thing as slavery in the end. And that's the thing there. We see now the Edur at this point, as part of their attempt to win the war against the Lethere, are summoning hundreds of demons who are indebted or chained, or whatever you want to call it, are chained to the Tist Edur. So they have to like increase their system of slavery and indebtedness that they already had in a way, obviously before, because they had like Lethere slaves, but they have to like make that a more integral part of the way their world works, to be able to then attack and like even compete with the Lethere, right? And that's a sad bit there, because you see Trollsengar ruminating on that kind of subject, because obviously he is the kind of guy who can't let these things well alone, right? But that's exactly the problem there, and that's, I feel, the thing that the big tragedy of the Edward there is that, as someone near a system, the Lethere system, that is built on continuous growth and economic subjugation, cultural subjugation, that's what drives the Lethere Empire, right? Exactly that. And as a neighboring people, the Edur have basically no choice. They have no choice. Either they become like the Lethere in hopes to, or make pacts with something even more problematic in order to stop the Lethere advance and that like continuous growth. I don't want to use the word cancer here, but you could probably do that. But they either have to become like the Lethere in a way to stand a chance against them, or they will be subjugated by the Lethere and thus also be incorporated into their like system. So they're damned both ways. And that's the sad part in there that we can look at when we look at how imperialism works in a way. It's like the Tist Edur have no chance to remain Tist Edur. Now, you can ask whether it's good, morally good for them to remain Tist Edur and or not. That's a different question. But in the sad truth about imperialism is, one of the sad truth about imperialism and colonialism is that they start, that they change they change every culture, and once you come into contact with that kind of like other group of people, you will have to change whether you want to or not, whether you are victorious in a way or not on a military field. That's the other thing there. The military conquest is just one aspect of that. I mean, you look back at, I don't know, see the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the is a different situation, I guess. But you look at the collapse, slow collapse or change of the Western Roman Empire. You have these all these what we should not call barbarians, but you have all these tribes that live outside the Roman Empire, and some of them, like, become mercenaries and so forth. And at some point, they then actually rule the empire or its successor kingdoms. But those people change in a lot of ways and become more Romanized in a way, even though they are in the end sort of victorious. The Ostrogoths and the Visigoths that like go to all the way to Spain and Italy and to become to rule there. They are far more Romanized than anything else. So that they have quite this is not the perfect example, obviously, and this is definitely not the best parallel, because you can go and look at all the other things that go around that. But anyway, the point is that even if they were victorious in a way, they were victorious by becoming more like the Roman Empire, like more Romanized in a way. They had to take on some of the aspects of the culture. Now you look at the Lethery and you look at their culture and you realize that their culture is hardcore consumerism and capitalism, and that's totally not what the Tist Edor do. And we've seen that before when we looked at the fact that they use coins only to, yeah, to bury people, right? And I guess we can talk about the whole symbol of Rulat Sengar being clothed in gold and so forth. But that's not what we're going to do today. That's something I'll leave for another day. But the point there is, you have they have to kind of accept that this other culture exists and change their ways in a way to even stand a chance. And the question is, if you change your ways, how far do you need to change your ways? And in the end, do you not really lose anyway, because the thing you set out to defend is no longer existing anyway, because you had to change so much to actually achieve your original goal? Now that's obviously a question that we need to answer, like ask ourselves in a lot of other situations as well. I just felt it might be interesting to look at this fact here for a moment, just for a moment. Next thing we need to look at is the level of magic that is unleashed here. Now, we've seen some of that before at the Siege of Coral, but it seems like once again the level of magic and brutality that the mages of the Lethery unleash. I mean, they burn only empty villages, but that's a different thing. Except maybe the Nerek. We'll see about that rather soon, or maybe they're just dead now. But what I'm trying to say here is that they totally the level of like blunt force, like brute force magic they're using is rather impressive. And when you look at it, that kind of makes sense in a way, because as we've learned, they are still, they think they're descendants of the First Empire. They're still thinking, their world still consists of holds and not of houses. As we learned, they're like an older, more archaic version of how to organize the world. They're more like a sledgehammer than a scalpel, is what I'm trying to say here. And they certainly really, pull out the magical sledgehammer there. Now, so we need to look at that kind of level of violence there, and there's definitely a discussion to be had on the use of weapons of mass destruction within the Malazan Book of the Fallen, because it's magic of mass destruction that we're using here, right? There's moral consequences to that as well, and I feel that will be a discussion for another day. I just wanted to point out that we see our first level, like our first glance of that now in chapter 13 or 14, whichever the one is I just crossed. And holy shit, just imagine that, like, they just like blow, like they just basically firebomb an entire like a bunch of villages, like an entire region. Basically, they just blast that in one ritual. So that's going to be a very brutal war indeed that we're heading into, because we learned, or like we heard someone say that the Tist Edor mages are able to challenge that and are their match. So we come to that point that we once again, that you see within the these discussions around World War One, when older tactics of military, that the thing that we saw, I guess it's sort of the thing that we saw at the Siege of Coral. We have these situations where just like a whole troop of soldiers that is just acting in a more traditional military way is just annihilated, obliterated by magic. And now we are heading into a conflict where we have both sides using these weapons, and then we'll see how that works, but it's not going to be fun, I suspect. So yeah, that's another thing that obviously is interesting. All right, let's return a bit for a bit to Tehol Bedict and the stuff that's going on in Letheras. Well, obviously, I really still enjoy a lot of it. The more political, economic side of it is very interesting. Also, it poses a lot of moral questions that we need to. There's one big question that I want to go into concerning Tehol Bedict. Um, I'm not going to do that right now because I feel that yeah, it's a bit too early for these kind of things because of the spoilers and stuff like that. I'll definitely we need to talk about Tehol and how much Tehol we all could be, and that's a question once again that yeah, I feel needs a bit more book to happen before we can talk about that spoiler free. Anyway, we see that he's doing a lot of stuff. He knows a shit ton of things because he's obviously rather smart, and he has some supernatural help because at this point we know that Bug is not just an elderly serving man. He has some very peculiar skills. We know that now. Anyway, we come to the point where he talks to those three women, to Shand, Orissa, and Hejan. And on the one hand, we need to talk. We have once again that whole situation about objectification in sexual matters, which is subverted by the fact that it is the like gender switched from what you might call like like fantasy normal, the fantasy norms or the fantasy mainstream up until at least a couple of years ago. I mean, that's the other thing you need to remember, that these Midnight Tides was like is still already like 15 years or so old. I don't know the exact age year right now, but yeah, it's like roughly 15 years old, and at that point topics like gender equality were not yet as front and center to also the fantasy genre as they are nowadays. So that's just when I'm like talking about how I personally really appreciate that. And maybe some of you are like, yeah, but I've read all these like self-published new fantasy authors and they're doing that all the time. So, yeah, they are doing it now. Just be aware of the like, I don't want to say historical aspect of it because 15 years ago is not that long ago actually. But just be aware of the fact that a lot has changed over the last 2 decades basically in these topics, due to the rise of the internet, among other things. Anyway, that's not exactly what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about the question of morality and revenge there, when Tejo decides not to actually collapse the whole thing right then and there because of the upcoming war, and he wants to wait. And the thing there is that we've come to the same problem or same question that Felicien faced in House of Chains and that Hiboric pointed out. The apocalypse is more akin to the thing that Hedjan and Rissa and Shand want, which is revenge and nothing after that, destruction. And now don't get me wrong, I do like me some good old destruction. I have nothing against good old destruction in general, but there is the fact there that if you don't plan beyond that, it becomes a barren thing. It's like it becomes its own goal. And now, don't get me wrong, there are situations in a human's life when you are pushed so far that just watching it all burn and not caring about anything else after that, maybe going down in flames with it, that is the option, the only option in a way that you have. That's possible. It's a valid thing. But it obviously also shows that the extremity to which some people were pushed by the system, the Lethery system, by the system of capitalism. But it also shows that, like, the hope that Tehol holds out is the hope that you can actually change. And he makes this explicit here, where the others like, yeah, we want revenge and nothing else. And he's like, yeah, but for me, the goal is to actually effect changes, make the place better. to not lose the hope and to not lose hope and just burn it all down and don't care about what happens afterwards. That's that's a vital aspect to Tejal's character that I think we need to keep in mind. He is much more an optimist. Like he's an idealist. He's frustrated with how the world is, but in his heart now he is more of an optimist. He has at least, stood up far enough to realize, back up far enough to realize that while the system is corrupt, he still holds out hope that there might be a way to actually change the system, make it less corrupt. And that's admirable. It's like I'm not sure if I would have the strength to do that. It's just like something that I feel is an important aspect to its character. He's not just like this like ruthless criminal mastermind who hates the corrupt system so much that he wants to destroy it. No, he's more than that. He is the one who actually tries to look for utopia's aft behind that. And that's a vital thing there that we find, that I personally find is a big problem. Not only me personally, but a huge problem nowadays is that sometimes there's a comment in there that I might explore a lot more later. But the question, I think it was a couple of years ago, Neil Stevenson talked about that. No, he talked more about the dystopian aspect of science fiction that he didn't like. But it goes in the same way. We have reached a point where a system has become so universally dominant in the minds of most people within that system that even the people that hate that system, despise the system, and want to take the system down are unable to think outside that system and are unable to come up with actual alternatives. Yes, there's a few, but in our mainstream fantasy and science fiction literature, which is sort of the area of fiction, of literature, where we can explore alternatives to our current situation, figure out what the advantages and disadvantages are. That Lethery system, the capitalism of the Lethery system, is sort of the only thing that's there. Like, I'm not saying look at like other like current historical systems. That's not the point there. The point there is that a worldview can become so dominant and prevalent, that it's so all-encompassing that it is basically impossible or very, very difficult to think outside of it and like just ask the question, so what if we would not go down that road? So yeah, that's, I guess, an important thing there that I just like thought about, and I feel that's a good way to end this. Like, go think of alternatives to to capitalism. And I'm not just saying that because of wearing a Karl Marx t-shirt. But anyway, we will talk again tomorrow about more Midnight Tides. I hope you have a good day, and I'll talk to you real soon. Cheers.